Just imagine hearing those words, spoken quietly on a totally normal flight the day before Thanksgiving. That one sentence kicked off one of the boldest crimes and honestly one of the greatest mysteries in American history.
Okay, so let's get right into it. We are talking about America's only unsolved skyjacking. This is a case that turned a criminal into a folk hero, a ghost who literally just vanished into the clouds. This is the story of D.B. Cooper.
So, our story starts not with a bang, but with a guy who could have been anybody. Seriously, he looked like your average businessman, dark suit, black tie, totally calm. He bought a one-way ticket under the name Dan Cooper.
And then, right after takeoff, he casually passes a note to a flight attendant. It says he has a bomb. His demands were super simple and very precise, $200,000 and 4 parachutes. And with this chilling calm, he got everything he asked for.
With the cash on board, he orders the plane right back into the air. And then, somewhere over the dark, stormy wilderness of Washington state, he lowers the rear staircase of the plane and jumps. And just like that, he was gone.
So, the big question, right? How on earth did he pull it off? To really get the legend, we first have to break down the mechanics of the crime itself. Let's start with the timeline of that crazy night.
I mean, you got to admit, the whole thing was planned out so carefully. From the moment he bought his cheap $20 ticket to the second he stepped out into a 10,000-foot freefall, every single move was calculated. He held an entire plane hostage without ever raising his voice, and then he just orchestrates his own impossible escape.
And let's be clear, this was not pocket change. 200 grand back in 1971 was a massive fortune. If you adjust that for today, we're talking about almost $1.5 million. All of it paid in unmarked $20 bills.
And this is the part that always gets me, the psychological picture that the crew painted of him. They said he was calm, thoughtful, almost like a gentleman. He ordered a bourbon, paid his tab, and never ever lost his cool. This was not some crazed hijacker. This was something else entirely.
All right, so a guy disappears into the night with a bag full of cash. What happens next? Well, one of the biggest and most frustrating manhunts in the history of the FBI. That's what.
The FBI gave the investigation a code name, NORJAC, which stood for Northwest Hijacking. And they threw everything they had at it. I mean, ground searches, planes in the air, thousands of interviews. For decades, it was this massive, all-out institutional effort to solve what seemed like a perfect crime.
And after all that, you know what they found? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No body, no parachute, none of the marked bills ever showed up at a bank. The FBI checked out over 800 suspects and cleared every single one. It was like D.B. Cooper jumped out of that plane and just straight out of existence.
Until this. 9 years later, in 1980, a little boy who was camping along the Columbia River finds 3 rotting bundles of cash. They check the serial numbers. It's a match. But instead of solving the case, this just made the mystery even deeper. Is this where he landed? Did he plant the money? It was the first real clue, but it was also the last. So, with the official investigation hitting a dead end, something else starts to happen. The public story begins to change. D.B. Cooper the criminal starts to fade away, and D.B. Cooper the folk hero begins to take his place. But why?
And this right here is the heart of the whole thing, isn't it? On one hand, you have a federal criminal who put dozens of lives at risk. But on the other hand, he's seen as this clever rogue who beat the system and just got away with it. That dual identity is the real key to his legend.
Yeah, you really have to remember the timing here. America in 1971 was just tired of the Vietnam War, and people were starting to really distrust the government. So in that kind of atmosphere, a story about one guy who cleverly and non-violently outsmarts the system, well, that was exactly the kind of story people wanted to hear.
But Cooper's story isn't just some old folktale. No, his jump had very real, very tangible consequences that have affected millions of us and permanently changed the way we all travel.
So check this out. It's called the Cooper vein. See, the hijacker took advantage of a design flaw in the Boeing 727 that let him open the rear stairs while the plane was flying. In direct response, the government made them install this device on all 727s. It literally closed the door on any copycats. It's a piece of hardware named after the very guy who made it necessary.
And his impact goes even further than that. The Cooper hijacking was a huge reason we have the airport security we have today. The whole idea of just walking onto a plane without having your bags or yourself screened, that became a thing of the past.
So in a very real way, every single time you go through a security checkpoint, you're living in the world that D.B. Cooper helped create.
So, after all these years, what do we actually think happened to him? The final piece of this whole puzzle is looking at the theories that still swirl around the phantom of Flight 305.
When you boil it all down, the theories really fall into three main buckets. One, he was a total amateur who basically jumped to his death in what were suicidal conditions. Two, he was a pro, maybe ex-military, who knew what he was doing but just got really unlucky. And three, which is a more recent theory based on particles found on the tie he left behind, suggests he was an aerospace insider, someone who knew those planes inside and out.
And then, after 45 years, the FBI basically called it quits. They officially closed the active case file. They think he probably died during the jump, but by closing the case without actually solving it, they pretty much handed it over to us, to the public, where the theories and the fascination are honestly stronger than ever.
And that, right there, really gets to the heart of it. We don't remember D.B. Cooper for the money he took. We remember him for the silence that followed. He's like a blank screen that we can project all our own ideas of rebellion and escape onto. He left us with the perfect, unsolvable puzzle.
Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought. Cooper vanished back in 1971. Today, we live in a world of GPS, facial recognition, digital footprints, everything. His story really forces us to ask, in an age where we're tracked all the time, does the kind of wilderness he jumped into even exist anymore? Could anyone ever truly disappear again?